The River That Became a Road. By Nasoraean Ray Taylor Ph.D. Paul and Simon of Samaria. One man, two names. Every empire rewrites its prophets. The man we call Paul the Apostle may be one of the most edited, refitted, and rebranded figures in all of religious history. Strip away the layers of Roman propaganda, Greek philosophical varnish, and Jewish rabbinic invention, and the core that remains looks nothing like the obedient missionary of Christian myth. What we see instead is the outline of another man, already known to the earliest Christian enemies as Simon of Samaria, called by them the Magus. He was a river preacher, a mystic, a rebel. Rome could not erase him, so it absorbed him. The Nasoraean origins of the movement. Long before any New Testament, before any Gospel of Matthew or Luke, there were Baptist sects stretching from the Jordan to the Euphrates. They called themselves the Nasoraeans, custodians of the light and of the living water. Their rituals of immersion rejected temple sacrifice and priestly authority. John the Baptist stood among them, and the earliest memory of Jesus places him within that same current. The Roman and Jewish establishments had every reason to suppress such a movement. Its message dissolved boundaries: no need for priests, temples, or tithes. Only water, conscience, and truth. When this message reached Samaria and Syria, it found a powerful voice in a teacher named Simon, who preached illumination from the great life and liberation from the bondage of law. Simon of Samaria in the historical record. Justin Martyr, a Samaritan himself, wrote in the 2nd century that Simon was revered by many as the first god. Irenaeus called him the father of all heresy. Hippolytus claimed his followers honored a woman companion named Helena and practiced symbolic immersion. In every hostile source, Simon is portrayed as a rival to Peter and as the founder of a spiritual current that the later church would label Gnostic. What matters is not the slander but the pattern. Simon is said to perform healings, proclaim the descent of divine light, reject the Mosaic law, and offer baptism for remission of sins. That is the same theology that appears in the earliest layer of the Pauline epistles. Paul's letters, a river beneath Roman stone. Even the church admits that half the letters bearing Paul's name are forgeries. Of the remaining 7, none survives in 1st century form. The oldest copies date from the late 2nd century, long after the events described. Within those texts the contradictions are striking. Paul preaches freedom from the law, then obedience to rulers. He calls himself a Pharisee, yet denounces circumcision and temple rites. He writes of revelation through water and light, yet the book of Acts portrays him as a dryland convert on a road to Damascus. The simplest explanation is redaction. An earlier corpus existed letters from a Nasoraean mystic whose message of inner awakening and baptismal transformation was too close to heresy for later Rome to tolerate. The editors replaced the river with the road and renamed the teacher. Simon the river preacher became Paul the Roman citizen. The Dutch radicals and the case for Simon-Paul identity. In the 19th century, the Dutch radical school reopened this question. Scholars such as Bruno Bauer, Allard Pearson, Willem Christian van Manen, and G.J.P.J. Bolland argued that Paul was not a historical apostle but a composite literary figure built from earlier sectarian writings. Bauer in particular noted the parallels between Simon Magus and Paul of Tarsus. Both claim visions of the divine light, both clash with Peter, both teach liberation from the law, and both are accused of heresy by the Jerusalem faction. Acts itself bears witness to this literary recycling. The Simon episode in Acts 8 and the Paul conversion in Acts 9 mirror each other point-for-point confrontation with Peter, accusation of sorcery or deception, rebuke, and departure. Only the names change. That is the signature of editorial transformation, not independent biography. The Saul-Paul Simon metamorphosis. Names are clues. The editors required a figure who could link Jewish scripture with Roman authority. Saul, the name of Israel's first king, supplied the Jewish legitimacy. Paul, Latin Paulus, meaning small or humble, supplied the Roman respectability. Simon, the dangerous Samaritan heretic, had to disappear. Yet fragments of him remain. Paul's claim to have confronted Peter to his face, his boast of working miracles, his association with mysterious feminine wisdom in 1 Corinthians 2, and his repeated insistence that his gospel came not from men but from revelation. These are Simon's traits, not those of a Pharisee. The editors could change his name, but not his voice. The Church's motive. By the 2nd century, competing sects all claimed to hold the true apostolic teaching. Rome needed a paper trail to prove its own authority. A Pharisee-turned-Christian missionary who preaches obedience to rulers and denounces rival prophets provided the perfect prototype. So the editors canonized Paul, inserted forged pastoral letters that established bishops, and condemned the Simonian and Nasoraean movements as sorcery. The transformation served political ends. It turned a religion of water into a religion of parchment, a baptism of conscience into submission to hierarchy. Linguistic and thematic evidence. Revelation by light. Both Simon and Paul claim direct revelation from heavenly light. Rejection of law. Both reject Mosaic law as bondage. Female SYZYGY. Simon's Helena mirrors Paul's doctrine of the Church as feminine counterpart of the Christ. Clash with Peter. Both are portrayed as opposing Peter's legal faction. Magician accusation. Paul is accused in the Acts of Paul and Thecla of sorcery, the same charge aimed at Simon. Water symbolism. Paul's baptismal imagery in Romans 6 and Galatians 3 reflects Samaritan and Nasoraean immersion rites. These parallels cannot be dismissed as coincidence. They describe the same ideological current expressed through different editorial filters. The forgotten voice. If we remove the imperial layers, what remains is a single riverborne vision. The teacher called Simon or Paul preached that humanity could awaken directly to the light of the great life through immersion in living water. No temple, no priest, no empire stood between the soul and the source. That voice threatened both synagogue and Caesar. To silence it, they turned him into a legend of obedience, forged letters in his name, and built a church on his ghost. Conclusion. The story of Paul the Apostle may be the most successful literary fraud in religious history. Behind it stands the drowned memory of Simon of Samaria, the Nasoraean messenger whose current still runs beneath the marble of the churches. Every time a believer reads that the letter kills, but the Spirit gives life, they are hearing his whisper from the river that Rome tried to drain. He was the same man. The empire merely changed his name. Veritas lux mea. Sharara binura.
Veritas lux mea. Truth is my light.